Good morning, good morning. My name is Peter Stanton, and I'm the publisher of the Worcester Business Journal. And on behalf of the Journal and our co-producers for this morning's breakfast, the Worcester Regional Chamber of Commerce, welcome to our 2013 economic forecast. This annual event has become well known for its terrific presenters, and this year promises to be no exception. In early 2009, we came here to laugh, to cry, and to share a hug. But the last 3 years, economic conditions have stabilized and shown some slow but steady improvement. This year, we hope the crystal ball shows the economy continuing to get better, and we're honored to have with us another strong panel of experts to help us discern the future. This morning, we will hear from two economists, Tim McGee, the Director of Macro Strategy and Research at U.S. Trust, part of Bank of America's Private Wealth Management Group, and Jeff Fuhrer, Executive Vice President and Senior Policy Advisor at the Federal Reserve of Boston. And in addition, from the corporate side, we're pleased to have Girish Kumar Navani, the CEO of eClinicalWorks of Westboro. Events like this take a lot of work to pull off, and we'd like to thank those organizations that have been integral to making this morning's event a reality, and that is especially our presenting sponsors, whose logos appear up on these blue signs up here: the Bank of America, Charter Business, Nichols College, and Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare. And also our supporting sponsors, Partridge Snow and Hahn and Bolus Lynch. Okay, just a couple of housekeeping things I want to point out. On your table, there's some index cards. And the way we've run the Q&A at this event in the past is we've sort of, if you have a question, right now you might have a question, or as our panelists present, you will develop questions. Write them out on the card. We'll have some folks walking around the room collecting the cards, and we'll pull them together and ask as many of those questions as we can during the Q&A period. So please use the index cards for that. And second of all, there's a one-sheet economic survey questionnaire on your table as well. So feel free to fill out where you think the Dow is going to be, state and federal unemployment rates, GDP growth, and sort of how much we're going to tackle the deficit. There's a question there, a new question there on that. We asked these same questions last year, and I've got some slides that show us where folks finished in last year's contest. So, and what we're going to do, I will read off. I'm going to show a slide with the top 5, and I think many folks are here in each category, and then we'll have gift certificates, restaurant gift certificates for the winner, for the number 1 person at the end of this event. So first slide is the Dow Jones Industrial Average, finished this year at 12,938. The winner is Louise Nordstrom from Nichols College, 12,935. And you can see the other folks also in the top 5. The next slide, the federal unemployment rate. We had 4 people guess that right on the button at 7.8%. Phil Sear, Doug Vigno, John Bensley, and Terry Shepard. The tiebreaker is the person with the best overall score in all categories, and that's Phil Sear of R.H. White. Nice going, Phil. Next. Oh, okay, mass unemployment rate, excuse me. Steve Thibodeau of O'Connor, Maloney & Company, 6.6%, had the highest score among all those other folks. 2 from Commerce Bank, who one must have looked at the other's homework. They all had it pinned at 6.6%. So congratulations to all of those, and to Steve, the winner of our gift certificate. And the national, all right, let's give him some props. The national GDP, 3.1%. We had 4 people get that, and another one very close to it in fifth place. Dave Smith from Merrill Lynch is our winner. Congratulations, Dave. And then Economist of the Year, which was the best combined score in all 4 of those categories. And I put in parentheses, we've got Doug Vigno of VHB and Blaine Marchand of Rockland Trust. And you can see where they finished in each of the four areas. Now, maybe to some folks to your embarrassment, but to others, I run road races, and sometimes after the race, you wait for the times to be posted so you can see how you did. And we've got out in right on the door over there, and I think it's posted twice. We've got all the scores from all the entries of last year and where you finished in each category. So if you want to look up how you did, please do so, and it's last year's results are in detail on the sign. Okay? And sorry, we didn't collect money from anyone to take them off the bottom of the list, but there were 55 total entries, and please feel free to enter again this year. It's now my pleasure to hand the mic over to our event partner and good friend, Dick Kennedy, the CEO of the Worcester Regional Chamber of Commerce. Dick.
Thank you very much and welcome. On behalf of the Chamber of Commerce, we are thrilled to be partnering with the Worcester Business Journal today on what has become an annual event that I think is very meaningful. Who would have thought that we'd still be talking about economic issues 3 or 4 years into this, what was a very bad downturn. And but we have learned new terms such as physical cliff and debt ceiling, and we're anxious to hear what our speakers have to say about the impact of that. I will tell you that the calls that I get from newspapers and other members of the Chamber focus on the issues that still lie ahead, and I think that people are very, very reluctant at this point in time to make significant capital investments, and also are wondering about the impact of the Affordable Care Act, tax in general, and so there's a lot to talk about today, and we've got some wonderful speakers to address some of those issues. But as I said, we are excited about this event. We enjoy putting it on an annual basis, and in particular, we enjoy working with the Worcester Business Journal in partnership for this. So welcome and enjoy the morning.
Okay, and we're going to hear a couple remarks from our presenting sponsors, and first from Bank of America, Edwin Shea, the Market President for the Central Mass Northeast region. Ed.
Thank you, Peter. We're proud to be here, especially want to thank the Worcester Business Journal and the Worcester Chamber of Commerce for bringing this tremendous event to us again this year. Proud to be here on behalf of Bank of America and Merrill Lynch and U.S. Trust in sponsoring this again for the second year. And I want to recognize Matt Shealy, who runs our Merrill Lynch complex in the Worcester market, and John Desmond, who runs our middle market group here in Worcester, just so folks know who some of the leaders are of what we deliver here in the Worcester market. We're also proud to have Tim McGee here again for the second year. And it's just an example of the strength and quality of resources that Bank of America brings to its customers in the market. Whether you're an individual, a business, or an institution, Bank of America is focused on delivering all we can for our clients. And there's many of our client managers and financial advisors here today. So if you get a chance, please introduce yourself and say hi. And again, thanks to our customers who are here, and we'll be saying hi later. Thanks.
Thank you, Ed. And next, from Charter Business, Robert DeMaria, Major Account Executive. Bob.
Good morning. Welcome to the Economic Breakfast. We've got some experts here that are going to talk about it in a little different. But let me tell you quick about what Charter Business does. We're a $7 billion company nationwide. I am the local face of Charter Business, along with a bunch of my colleagues. And how can we help your bottom line in 2013? How many people have a phone system older than they are? How many people are looking to expand? All right, people hear about the cloud. What's the cloud? How do you get your software up to the cloud? Well, that's what we do. We provide phone service. We provide internet high-speed access. Anybody that's done a GoToMeeting web conference where it's very choppy, we provide those types of services, high-speed internet. Can you afford not to improve your business over this coming year? 30 minutes or less. You can't afford not to talk to one of myself or one of my colleagues. And that's what we do. Charter Business, we come, we talk with you, and help you solve your problems. So thank you very much, and welcome to the breakfast.
Okay, and from Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare, Kate McEvoy-Zdonczyk, the Vice President for Central and Western Massachusetts Markets. Katie.
Last time I did this, Pete took the microphone away from me, so I'll be quick. First, I just want to commend, I think it's Partridge, Snow and Hahn. This is fabulous marketing this morning, and it was a little inconvenient, but I mean, I remember your name, and I will, because it's going to be such a pain to get out of here in the snow. Get it? There's a pun, the joke. Okay. Have more bacon, there's plenty. So my name's Kate McEvoy-Zdonczyk, and I run the Central and Western Mass Regional Market for Harvard Pilgrim. And what they did in their infinite wisdom was carve out our region of the state as its own territory. The 1.5 million lives in Central and Western Massachusetts is actually a greater population than the state of Maine or the state of New Hampshire, and they are separate markets for Harvard Pilgrim as well. So in thinking of how healthcare tends to be local and how we costs are different across the state and the landscape of business is different across the state, we carved out the Central and Western Mass regions, so really Hampton, Hampshire, Franklin, and Worcester counties, to be run separately as its own market. And I'm here to do that for Harvard Pilgrim and for you. So if you're looking for any great health insurance products, give us a call. That's our quick commercial. And one thing that I'd say to tie into the breakfast, you're probably all experiencing better than usual healthcare renewal rates, which ties into our economic forecast. Big piece of that is trend, which is unit cost plus utilization, which is down. Frankly, it's contingent upon the economy. A lot of people are not spending their deductibles. A lot of people are not choosing to be out of work for small procedures. So enjoy the premium holiday as it goes now, because as the economy increases, you're going to see trends start to rise again. So that's maybe another neat contest to have to predict medical trend year over year. Think about it, because all of us have to pay for health insurance, and it's a pretty big cost. So give us a call. We're here for you. We're happy to be a partner to you and your business, and that's all we have to say. Have a great breakfast. Thanks for coming out. Bye.
Thank you. From Katie's crystal ball, a prediction. Okay. And from Nichols College, Dr. Susan West Engelkemeyer, the president of the school.
Thanks, Peter. I like you better in the tuxedo, but you decided against that today, huh? We're always delighted to be part of the events that the Business Journal sponsors. They're always relevant and interesting. And we, too, wonder what beholds us in 2013. You know, there are a lot of headlines out there about the prohibitive cost of college education. You see the headlines of a student who graduates with $80,000 or $100,000 in debt. But the national average is only about $25,000. And a student with an undergraduate degree out-earns someone without one by nearly $800,000 over their lifetime of work. So, you know, I'd say that's a pretty good return on investment, but we tend not to see some of those stories. At Nichols, we are also challenged with making sure that families and students can find an affordable path to a degree for their sons and daughters. And as you know, we have a wide range of degree programs, but we're looking for students, and we're looking for mentors, and we're looking for people who want to be involved in the classroom or with internships. In fact, we have 2 people from our Career Services office here, just in case you want to hand off a business card. So welcome. I'm glad everyone braved the weather today from Dudley. It was a lovely drive of over an hour in the snow, but I look forward to today's session.
Thank you, Susan. Okay, just before we get going with the panel, I had a little special introduction that sets the tone for this morning. So my first question to you is, do we all know the second most popular website behind Google for a search? Who knows? YouTube. Okay, thank you, YouTube. So that's correct. So I went onto YouTube and gathering some ideas for this morning's opening remarks, and I looked at it and I found what I think you'll agree is a perfect table setter for our august panel of experts. This is about a 30-second clip, and if you have any trouble understanding the language, just look for the subtitles.
עוד שנה אזרחית מסתיימת, ובכל מקום אתם קוראים תחזיות. יש תחזיות כלכליות, תחזיות ביטחוניות, יש אסטרולוגים, מיסטיקנים, קוראים בקפה. אבל אחרי שנה, מי בודק? מי טורח לקרוא את כל התחזיות האלה ולברר מה באמת קרה ומה לא? אז היום נגלה איזה אתר הצליח לחזות את העתיד במדויק. ולמה? כי הם ידעו עם מי להתייעץ.
Okay. You know, it was funnier when I looked at it yesterday than it was this morning. I assure you. And missing the subtitles, that was actually someone making an economic forecast and promising great results. So anyways, did anyone recognize the language? That was Hebrew, apparently. So anyways, okay. Well, here are our panel of experts, and I think we'd like to ask them all up to the podium at one time, and we'll and one by one they'll present, and then we'll go to the Q&A after they've each done their presentation. So if you'd all come up. First up is Robert T. McGee. Tim McGee is the Director of Macro Strategy and Research at U.S. Trust, a part of Bank of America's Private Wealth Management Division. He also serves on the Investment Strategy Committee and has been named the nation's top economic forecaster multiple times. He has spent time writing and studying economic trends in Japan, has taught at Florida State and NYU, and has worked at the New York Federal Reserve Bank. He's been quoted in Business Week, USA Today, the Wall Street Journal, and the New York Times, as well as appeared on CSNBC, Reuters, and Bloomberg TV. Tim earned a BS from the Georgia Institute of Technology and his MA and Ph.D. from the University of Wisconsin, backed by popular demand from his 2012 appearance at this event, but without a limp or cast on his foot from a skiing accident. Please welcome Tim McGee.
Last year I went to Wachusett with my grandson before I came here, and that was a mistake. So this time I've waited, and it turns out it might have been a good idea because I think we have a beautiful snowfall here, and it would be a great day to be there instead of here listening to economic forecasts. I thought since Jeff's going to cover the U.S., and my forecast is really pretty good, close to the Federal Reserve forecast. I don't know if Jeff's is. But I decided rather than focusing on the United States, I'll focus on more of the global trends and the some of the things that are behind the differences in the economy in this cycle versus the last cycle. And but first I'll give my overall view about the global economy, and then I'll try to leave enough time to talk a little bit about the political situation, because that's something I don't like to talk about because I feel like it's primarily theater. Last year we spent a lot of time worrying about the fiscal cliff, but throughout the year we expected that it wouldn't actually happen, that they would come to an agreement at the last minute, and that's what happened. So let me talk a little bit about that briefly first, because I don't have a lot of time, but I recommend, if you haven't seen Bob Woodward's book, The Price of Politics, it pretty much lays out the political dynamics and how Washington is working or not working. And if you go back and look at it focuses on the 2011 failure to get a budget deal when the United States got downgraded. And if you go back and look at the elements of the deal that almost was, that pretty much has laid out the groundwork for where we're headed, in our opinion, in terms of getting this fiscal deal-making done. Essentially, Obama and Boehner came very close to reaching an agreement, and then at the last minute, for various reasons, they backed away. One of the main reasons was because for the political season that was coming, each side had to run more to the extremes of their party in the election season in order to get reelected, and that meant that doing a deal at the beginning would have sort of taken all the drama out of that. It would have made it harder to get elected if they had a compromise, because the extremes on both party sides would have resented that. So if you look at the details of what was almost agreed to, that's where we think we're headed. The first phase of that was accomplished in the fiscal cliff deal, and that involved letting Republicans who are against tax hikes vote against the bill. So in order to get things done, if you look at how the Senate voted, it was almost 10-to-1 in favor of it. There's a big desire to get the deal done, but there's a political problem for the right in voting for tax hikes, and there's a political problem on the left for reining in entitlement spending growth. So the first phase involved getting a deal where the Republicans who are against tax hikes could vote against it. If you look at the vote in the House, it required a Democratic majority to get the fiscal cliff deal done. That's because this deal focused on raising tax rates, and that's what the right wing could not go back and run for re-election if they had voted for tax hikes. This next phase is going to be about reining in the spending cuts, and that means what's likely when they eventually, after they've played out all the drama, basically they'll be able to get the right-wing Republicans to vote for these spending controls, but there'll be a substantial segment of the left-wing Democrats who won't be willing to vote for some of the things that are needed to rein in entitlement spending, such as, for example, changing the way cost of living increases are calculated. For a lot of left-wing Democrats, if they voted for that, it would make them more vulnerable in primary campaigns and re-election. So this thing is working out in stages. The stages are designed to allow the politicians to do what they need to do to get reelected, because as much as they might want to have a deal, their number one priority always is to get reelected. So this is the way we see this thing playing out. This phase now is focused on the spending cuts. Obama's not really involved in the nitty-gritty of this. He's kept himself above it by being able to play the political angle. And the real nitty-gritty stuff's being done by Biden and McConnell in the Senate. And if you go back and you read the Woodward book, you'll see that the way he describes the first budget crisis pretty much laid the groundwork for how the fiscal cliff played out. And it also, in our opinion, is predictive for what's going to happen with the budget deal. Academic studies show clearly that the only way that you get budget crises under control is to deal with the spending side at about a 3-to-1 ratio of spending cuts to tax increases. So we've had the revenue increases. The next phase will be tax reform that deals with getting a more efficient use of the tax base where there are less deductions and breaks so that you get more revenue that way rather than raising the rates. But the big thing that still remains to be done is to get the entitlement spending under control, and that's where the focus has got to be. And until there is that focus, there won't be a deal, and this brinkmanship will go as far as it needs to get that done. Okay, so that's our outlook. We think there's been an over-focus on this. It's caused tremendous uncertainty. The last 3 years, people didn't know what their tax rates were until the very end of the year at the last minute. That creates a lot of uncertainty. But worse than that is the risk that's inherent in the threats of things like the fiscal cliff, where if we had gone over the total fiscal cliff, we would have gone into a recession in the first half of this year. Thankfully, we didn't do that. But the worry about that has caused an obsession that is negative for the economy. So once we get through this, things should be much better from the point of view of businesses being able to plan, invest, and hire. And that's where we think we're headed. That's why we think the stock market is doing so well. It's anticipating that we're going to get through this. So with that said, let me just talk briefly about the global economy and some of the major trends and why the United States is in the catbird seat for the new global economy. In 2009, we were in a serious financial crisis. The serious financial crisis was the result of the expansion that went before it. From a global perspective, that expansion was characterized by the fact that it depended on increasing imbalances in the global economy for growth to continue. So, for example, China's growth was predicated on its export surplus getting bigger and bigger over time. The flip side of that was countries like the United States had deficits on trade that were getting bigger and bigger. So this was an unbalanced expansion, and the recycling of the surpluses from countries like China into the deficit countries like the United States, as China bought our debt, but also in countries like Ireland, Spain, and the UK, where housing bubbles developed because the recycled money from the surpluses in places like China was financing booms in the deficit countries like the United States. And that culminated in the housing bubble in the United States and housing bubbles that were even bigger in some other countries. The financial crisis ended that dynamic, and we're in a new expansion that is characterized by the opposite of that. And because of that, it's a more sustainable expansion. We're in a period of global rebalancing. What that means is China's growth now is not predicated on an ever-growing surplus, and the U.S. is not seeing an ever-growing deficit on trade. If you look at the difference in the trade deficits and surpluses between countries between, say, 2006, right before the crisis when we were at the peak of the last expansion, and, say, last year or 2011 is the last full year we have trade data for the full year. China's deficits come down from over 9% to less than 3%. It's surplus. The U.S. deficit has come down by half, from 6% to about 3%. Countries like Spain and Greece have actually gone from very big trade deficits to being balanced pretty much now. And that's true in all the major surplus countries. Even Germany and Japan have seen their trade surpluses come down. So this is a major theme that we have in our investment strategy. My group at U.S. Trust basically looks at global trends to decide what they mean for asset allocation and tactical investment strategy. And global rebalancing is one of our themes. Let me say the forecast before I run out of time. If you go back then and look at the financial crisis in 2009, global growth was the worst it's been in the post-war period. Every country in the world, every major developed country and underdeveloped country applied fiscal and monetary stimulus to get out of that worst recession since the 1930s. And in 2010, the results of that were showing in the fact that global growth had picked up to 5% in 2010. 5% is way above the trend growth rate for the globe. We think the global trend growth rate is around 4%, maybe just a little bit under that. So everybody had a synchronized global expansion out of the recession, 5% global GDP growth. The U.S., for example, saw its recession end in mid-2009. By the end of 2010, we were a year and a half into recovery. At that point in time, the different parts of the world started to behave differently. The U.S. continued to apply stimulative monetary policy and avoided fiscal austerity. So our recovery continued, and we've been growing at about a 2%, a little bit better growth rate ever since the recovery began in the middle of 2009. We didn't have a relapse after the 2010 pickup. Europe did. Europe made two big policy mistakes that caused them to go back into recession after their 2010 recovery. Number one, they over-applied fiscal austerity to parts of their economy that were having debt problems, and that caused recessions to worsen in those places, places like Greece and Spain, to the point where it began to infect the core countries in Europe. And by the end of 2011, Europe was back in a recession, which they haven't gotten out of yet. China and the emerging markets started to experience an inflation problem in 2010 because most of the 5% growth rate in the global economy was coming out of the emerging markets in a reignition of the boom in China. So that part of the world, countries like China and Brazil, began to tighten their monetary policy, reduce their fiscal stimulus, and through 2011, they began to slow down. And so by last year, the big question was whether China was going to have a hard landing, whether the emerging markets were going to turn around. And basically what's happened is 2012 was the year when they stopped doing the tightening of policy, started to relent on that, started to ease a little bit. So since the second half of 2011, the emerging markets have been applying monetary ease and more fiscal stimulus, and their economies have started to turn around. In the middle of 2012, when there was the most talk about China's hard landing, that's when the seeds of a reignition of Chinese growth began to take hold. And what we've seen in the last 6 months, the last 3 months, is the emerging markets are turning back up. So the emerging markets are accounting for about 3/4 of global growth. If I have time, I'll talk a little bit about the themes around that. Okay, so the bottom line here is after dealing with their inflation problem that arose in 2010, the emerging markets now have lower inflation and their growth rates are picking up. The United States remains on a relatively steady trend of growth. Unemployment's coming down, and corporate profits have never been stronger. That's why the stock market's doing so well. Europe was the most threatening thing to the global economy, and that's because of the policy mistakes that the ECB was making and the austerity that was too much to keep Europe out of recession. In late 2011, the ECB leadership changed when Mario Draghi was appointed to the head of the ECB. And Mario Draghi had the same training here in Massachusetts that Ben Bernanke had that shown itself to be the appropriate way to deal with a debt deflation threat of the magnitude that we've faced in the world and the United States over the last several years. the first thing he did was start to provide assurance that the ECB would support the European banking system. He provided liquidity, long-term repo facilities starting in late 11. And then last year, the European Summit made a big leap forward when they agreed to unify the banking oversight in the European Union and let the ECB play a major role in that. Before that, the main problem that threatened to cause another global financial crisis like the Lehman crisis in the United States was that each country was responsible for its own banking system. And in Europe, the banking systems are much bigger relative to the size of the national economies than they are, for example, in the United States. So countries like Ireland and Spain and Greece saw their government finances pulled down by the fact that to save their banking systems, their fiscal finances were put haywire. Unifying that makes it much more feasible for the Europeans to deal with their financial crisis. And so what we've seen in Europe is that while they're in recession, the deterioration, the continual drop in growth rates has stopped. And our outlook for Europe this year is that they will continue to muddle along. They won't get worse. The United States will continue to grow. Housing recovery is kicking in. We think we'll get more upside to growth in the U.S. And the emerging market growth rates are picking up. So the bottom line here is that after slowing from 5% in 2010 down to about 3% in 2011, global growth is turning around for the reasons I talked about and should pick up into the 3.5% to 4% range that is much closer to trend. So that's the outlook for the world. Let me just say a couple of words about trends because my time's up. Susan mentioned education. Globalization is one of our biggest themes. Globalization is being driven by accelerating technological change. Accelerating technological change is the most important trend in the global economy, and it's a driving force for globalization. It's also a driving force for income inequality in the United States. And the major reason for that is that as the world globalizes, the bulk of the U.S. population is competing with the 80% of the globe's people that are coming out of subsistence poverty and moving into jobs that compete with a lot of the jobs in the United States. The main separator that saves people from that competition is education. The premium to education is getting bigger. And if you look at the unemployment rate in the United States for people with a college education, it's down below, it's in the 4s, I think. It's way below the average. And we've got a record number of jobs for people who have college education. Okay, the reason for this is this globalization and the fact that it's giving a premium. The United States has a large part of the well-educated population in the world, and the returns to that are greater in a globalizing economy. The competition in the mass bulk of the population is severe, and that's what's causing the income inequality that is making a lot of the middle class fall behind the people that have education and are benefiting from this globalization trend. So I couldn't agree more with her comments. It's one of the major things, one of the major ways that we can get unemployment down and deal with income inequality. The world is seeing a fast reduction in income inequality because the bulk of the world's population is moving out of subsistence poverty. But in the rich part of the world, income inequality is getting worse because the people with education that are getting a premium are moving faster away from the people who don't, who are in a much more severe competition with the bulk of the world's population. So I think that covers most of my bases. If you have questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Sorry to rush, but thank you.
You know, we do have some good time for Q&A. Just to clue you in, with each of the speakers, we went over these protocols. I said, okay, first, when we're right at the end, I'll come up and stand there quietly. Second, I'll come and give you a tap on the elbow. And the third, I think, Jeff, was a full-body tackle away from the podium. So we didn't come close to that. Thank you, Tim. Those were terrific remarks, and we look forward to hearing you in the Q&A session. Okay, next we're going to hear from Girish Kumar Navani, who is the co-founder and CEO of eClinicalWorks of Westboro. Girish oversees the strategic direction of eClinicalWorks, a market leader in ambulatory clinical systems, and he leads efforts to grow and expand all aspects of the business. Founded in 1999, the privately held eClinicalWorks grew its electronic health records business to $4 million in its first 5 years, and then saw sales truly take off as 2012 revenues, I believe, top, was it 250, 260 million, something in that scale, just an extraordinary growth. The firm employs over 2,100 people, with that headcount growing regularly. Girish is a former Worcester Business Journal Business Leader of the Year, and prior to co-founding eClinicalWorks, he led successful IT and business initiatives at Fidelity Investments, Teradyne, and Aspen Technology. He holds a Master's of Science in Engineering from Boston University. Please welcome Girish Kumar Navani.
Thank you, Peter. I don't know if I'm qualified for economic forecast, but I can tell you Sunday the Patriots are going to win. I think that was a great talk on where the world's going and the economic changes that we are seeing. And one of the great points you made around technology being a driver for economic growth. I believe that. I've spent my entire career in the world of technology, information technology specifically. And I do see technology to be a driver for economic growth, independent of an industry. You can see technology changes or technological advancements impact growth in two factors. One, either it reduces costs by finding ways to do things faster, or the second one, where it makes price visible, so competition gets into the way and finds a way to bring economic growth, because now everyone's trying to compete and can't charge premiums, and makes it difficult for any one individual to monopolize the market. If I take you back 20 plus years and ask the question, what were the technological changes that we were seeing? We were trying to build information systems in large businesses, whether it was banking, whether it was telecom, whether it was education and universities. Emails were trying to take over, and PCs were becoming relevant on everybody's desktop. And that changed many industries. I spent the early 90s and the mid 90s at companies like Fidelity and Teradyne and Aspen, figuring out how to make businesses run faster by developing software that would streamline decision making. That trend, in a way, has come into healthcare a bit later. It came about 10 years later than you and I saw it in some other industries. And I'm grateful for that in a way, else I wouldn't have founded eClinicalWorks. So sometimes things that don't necessarily look obvious or good might turn out good for some other people like me. So I moved into eClinicalWorks, or started eClinicalWorks in 1999 with the aspirations of digitizing physician offices, because they were all on paper. I don't know if you recall the days when you would go into an office and they'd schedule on paper, and they'd try and book your appointments or rebook your appointments also on that same book. But that trend has changed. It might not be obvious to you today, but it is very difficult to find a physician office now that schedules appointments on books. There are very few physician offices left that actually do electronic billing to insurance companies on paper, because most insurance companies don't allow it anymore. But one trend that is still going on in that space is the digitization of electronic health records, which is the prescriptions that you write, the lab orders that you place, the patient's charts that you go ahead and document so that they can become interoperable at some point. And that digitization is probably about 50% of its way in to this industry. That's fueled the growth of eClinicalWorks in the last decade. To simplify it, we've gone from being a company of $1 million in revenue in 2003 to a company that's forecasting $250 million for last year and probably 300 plus this year. built around the premise that every single physician office in this country will be digital within the next 3 to 5 years. We do expect that trend to help us continue to fuel our economic growth and the economic growth of the places where we have our offices. But we measure growth in some other ways as well, not just the dollars. I mean, employee headcount is an economic indicator. Office locations, we have 5 of them in the country now, is one indicator. But there's another indicator of success that is eventually going to help the economy even in a bigger way. What we do at eClinicalWorks, in a way, changes the healthcare cost structure and care structure 10, 20 years down the curve. So it's difficult to measure it today because you're just in the process of changing the industry. But if you look at healthcare 10, 20 years down, you'll actually find that patients have healthier lives because they were either detected sooner or they had controls in their chronic conditions faster. And technology helped patients and physicians communicate effectively. So the economic stimulus that is in play today for digitizing healthcare long-term will also have a significant impact on every business because their healthcare costs should be lower. It's hard to believe that now because we have some reform coming in the industry that, in a way, I would call burdens everyone with tax on healthcare. I will exclude myself from that conversation because I don't understand healthcare delivery as well as I understand healthcare technology. But I do know this, that humans are pretty smart and creative creatures, that on one side, if the cost continues to go up, that they'll find technological changes to find costs to come down by creating some price transparency or competition. The only place where that doesn't apply is to the US government, but it applies everywhere else. Yes, I can't understand how you and I can run a $77 billion deficit every month and still sleep well at night. But so where do I see the industry going? And that's where I would put the economic outlook for both my company and the industry as a whole, not just for 2013, but the next 5+ years. First, I'm extremely optimistic. Healthcare is going to change, and it's going to change in a dramatic way in the next 10 years. Dramatic. And I think it's going to have a significant impact on cost coming down. And it's going to have better cost and price delivery points because technology is going to change it. So let's look at the status quo today of healthcare. And I apologize if any one of you works in any of these traditional care settings that we have today. But it has to change because it's broken. We have traditional hospitals and hospital systems. Then we have the traditional payer model that looks at paying the insurances. And then there is the consumer, the patient. And the sad part of the healthcare system today is that the patient has no understanding of what he and she is spending on healthcare. Because most of us use the Blue Cross Blue Shield or United or whatever other card we carry as a blank credit card check that you can swipe at any place and you think it's going to get paid for. Most of us that run a business understand that it eventually gets paid by the employer. It doesn't get paid by the insurance company. So I think that healthcare technology, HIT, after the last 10 years, where we successfully digitized physician offices and hospitals, and over the next 2 to 3, 5 years, we'll probably finish that job of converting every single health delivery setting to be on a technology base, that the consumer is going to start demanding more. The consumer is going to start asking for price visibility. Decision-making that says, I am not going to go pick up my prescription blindly at CVS or Walgreens or Walmart unless you tell me what it exactly costs at each one of these places. And then I'll decide based on how much I have to travel and what convenience factor factors in before I go pick my prescription at one of these places. And I will influence my physician to write prescriptions at places that are price transparent, competitive, and eventually save and keep money in my pocketbook. You will do the same thing for diagnostic imaging studies. Today, you and I get an MRI done, and we hardly know what it costs. That will change. I'll come to the economic side, why this will fuel a significant sea change of growth in the industry. You will see the same thing with ER rooms and ED rooms that have no price visibility. So I see, just like Amazon changed the whole industry of e-tailing by connecting the consumer to the supplier, The supplier was those of books and DVDs. They expanded their whole footprint from books to doing everything now, and built a platform that eventually connected the consumer that's able to then buy stuff online at a significantly better price point with the same delivery settings of getting stuff delivered at home within 24 to 48 hours. We think healthcare will move in that same direction. Consumer-centric healthcare will change the whole paradigm of how we ask for services. People that supplied healthcare will have to compete in that price pattern on an open playing field. It will change the equation of what we consider a payer to be today. So Blue Cross and United might become different business models and not necessarily transactions of health exchanges. And what that will do is bring healthcare costs down. So if I believe that the next 10 years, this largest industry or the largest cost burden, if we look at it this way, is going to change and come down in a big way, or at least not grow at the rate it is growing today. That you and I will see another economic boom because that money will find a way to reinvest itself somewhere else. So I started the talk by saying technology can be a driver of economic growth. Sometimes it's by creating efficiencies within your workplace, whether it was the PC that I alluded to, or in this case with healthcare, I think health IT or healthcare information technology, full form of it, will make economic stimulus or economic impact by making price transparency and time and efficiency not have to worry about the burden of a tax that comes in by allowing all players in this ecosystem to operate just like we do on Amazon with either buying books or DVDs, or for that matter, buying an airline ticket on Orbitz, or trying to go to banking and try and understand that we can take and withdraw our funds without having to worry about going physically to the teller machine. So yes, I am optimistic that both 2013, because I still expect eClinicalWorks to grow for its base core business of deploying health records, and our diversification into this model of health information on the web by allowing consumers of healthcare to connect to suppliers of care will boom the next 10 plus years. We expect significant headcount growth. We expect to make a difference in reducing healthcare costs. And whether the rest of the world grows economically or not is not a forecast I can make because I don't understand it well enough. But I do understand that healthcare as a whole is a pretty big industry and it's significantly inefficient today, which means the opportunity to change it and create significant more jobs in it and create more efficiency to bring long-term costs down is a big play. Lastly, if you ask me what helps any business grow, and I don't know if that's the right discussion you want to have at this forum, but I say sometimes conservative growth is the best advice I give. Don't try to go ahead and make all your money this year. Try and plan out a revenue cycle curve with your customer where they pay you on an ongoing basis every month or every year for the next 10 years. And then you keep adding one customer at a time. And if you build your business in a way with those foundations in place, then some of the economic uncertainties, whether we saw them in 2009 or 2010, or whether we see the economic boom that will hopefully come in the next year, 2 years, and continue, your business can afford to invest in its growth, whether it's R&D and people, if you have guaranteed recurring revenue stream. In technology, it's easy for us to do that. We've actually had our model completely built around a recurring revenue stream. So I know going into 2013 that the recurring revenue stream from our existing customers is larger than our operating expenses, which means that we can fuel the growth by adding more customers, but also adding more people. And that's how we expect to continue to grow in this industry. So that's my very, very narrow view on one large industry, on where we see economic stimulus and where we see economic change coming. And I am properly optimistic about 2013 and beyond. So thank you.
Thank you, Girish. That was terrific. Just a reminder before I introduce Jeff that we are going to be, Chris, I think we're going to be collecting the Q&A cards just sort of during Jeff's talk. So while he may stimulate extra questions, hopefully most of those are ready in a few minutes and they'll be collected. Okay, Jeff Fuhrer is Executive Vice President and Senior Policy Advisor at the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston and responsible for the bank's regional and community outreach. He's an associate economist of the Fed's Open Market Committee and regularly attends this key U.S. policy making meeting with the bank's president. Jeff has been active in economic research for more than 2 decades, has served as an associate editor for the American Economic Review. He has published numerous scholarly papers on the interactions among monetary policy, inflation, consumer spending, and asset pricing. A resident of nearby Boxborough, Jeff earned an A.B. in economics with the highest honors from Princeton and received his M.A. and Ph.D. in economics from Harvard University. Please welcome Jeffrey Fuhrer.
Thank you very much for that introduction. I'm sure you will be searching the web shortly to read all the papers I wrote about the interactions between monetary policy and the real economy. They're fascinating. They've got equations. They've got numbers. I expect my Google ratings to go way up after that. So I'm Jeff. I'm an economist. I work for the Fed. One of the things I want to do today is kind of represent the Fed. I know that the Fed has been in the news far more in the last few years than ever before. Not all of that coverage has been positive. I know that. What I want you to know is that myself and folks like me who work at the Fed, our job is to try to make the economy better. We don't always do that perfectly, but we're certainly trying. I just want you to know that we are, by and large, just a bunch of shy and lovable people. We're working on your behalf. That's what we do. And I'm really, actually, really impressed to see this many people come out on a snowy morning to listen, in part to me. I understand why they might want to listen to Tim or Girish, but you are a brave lot to listen to me. I'm going to flash up a bunch of pictures. How many of you guys love looking at charts of data and stuff? Anybody? 3 people? 4? No, 4. Actually, 4. If you don't love the charts, you can just listen to the mellifluous tones of my voice instead. So I want to start with looking at what's a topic that was raised by Tim, which is the uncertainty that was holding the economy back. This blue line actually is a measure of uncertainty. It's done by looking at a bunch of newspaper articles and so on, but they create an index. You can see that it was quite elevated both in the early part of 2011. There are good reasons for that. And then late in the year because of the fiscal cliff. The good news is that this is actually collected daily, so after January 3rd, which is just a few days ago now, after January 3rd, the level of uncertainty as measured by this index actually went down. The green line shows you a financial market measure of uncertainty. That also went down a bit. So I'm hopeful that through this year, assuming that a few intelligent decisions are made somewhat south of us, down in D.C., that uncertainty will further dissipate, and that actually will have an important positive influence on the economy. Really important, I think, to talk about the labor market. That is at the center of what goes on in the U.S. economy. Still accounts for 70% of the cost of doing business on average in the U.S. economy. These are 2 measures of labor market slack. The one on the bottom is the conventional measure. It's the unemployment rate. It's still elevated, but fortunately it's been coming down somewhat gradually. It peaked at 10%. It's now at 7.8%, as the card on your table shows. I'm kind of glad I didn't submit a forecast in the last round, because I'm not sure I would have won. And then you'd ask, why am I up here instead of the guys who won the contest? But let's pretend that I won the contest last time, and that's why I'm here. And I predicted 7.8%, which isn't too far from what I predicted. But the number on the top is just a broader measure of labor market slack. It includes not only people who are officially counted as unemployed, but also folks who would like to have work if the economy were better for a variety of reasons. And that's, it's a significantly higher number, but that's also made some progress, so that's good. The one that has made less progress is this blue line that I just flashed up. That's the ratio of employment, total people employed to population. Why do we put that up? Well, because in counting the unemployment rate, you have to worry about whether people are actually in the labor force or not. That's the way the Bureau of Labor Statistics thinks about it. You have to be in the labor force. How do you know if you're in the labor force? If you looked for work somewhat during a reference period, it's just a little fuzzy. So people come and go in and out of the labor force, and that could move the unemployment rate around. This number just sidesteps that and says how many people are employed, how many people are above the age of 16 in the population. That kind of sidesteps those complications. And what you can see is that's actually been pretty flat over the last several years. So that gives you a somewhat weaker picture of labor market slack. Those are just some recent numbers. What's happened to employment growth? So this first thing, that's just total, the 3-month average of growth. If you look to the right side, it's been averaging in the neighborhood of 150,000 per month growth. That's not bad. It's not like the kind of growth you typically see in a really robust recovery, but it's positive, so that's good. The red line just shows you that the private employment growth has been a little bit better, Consequently, then, the government has been subtracting jobs on average over the past several months. That's not great. The state and local sector actually a little better than it has been recently, so maybe that will help with the government side of job creation. I know Girish said that the government never is innovative or anything. I just want to make a plug for the Federal Reserve part of the government. We actually did a bunch of new things in the last 4 or 5 years. So at least you got one branch of the government working for you and being innovative and creative, and we're shy, and I hope lovable. Okay, keep plugging that. It might work one day. Couple of quick indicators on business and household sectors. First, on the business sector on the left-hand panel there, that's showing you a bunch of squiggly lines. So, you know, as I said, those are fun to look at. Squiggly lines are always fun to look at. The blue lines are about shipments and orders of capital goods, real equipment, plant and equipment. This one mostly just equipment. What's that saying is that, so they're tipping up a little bit on the right-hand side. That's good. That's the good news. The not as good news is that the shipments, which are about sort of the present, what's being delivered for capital goods today, are above the orders. That's the future stuff that will be delivered a few months from now. So the future looks a little bit less good than the present, so that means maybe the present will be tipping down a bit. So in the near term, a little bit of softness in the capital goods arena. On the consumer side, that's in the right-hand panel here, a couple of lines. The red and the blue lines are showing you what's going on both with disposable income growth and with consumer spending growth. And those are kind of, you know, getting a little bit weaker over the end of last year, the second half of last year. The green line is consumer sentiment. That's bounced around a bit. The good news is it's now well above where it was in the depths of the recession. So consumers are feeling better about stuff. The most recent numbers dipped down. I think that's likely due to the effects of the uncertainty at the end of the year with the fiscal cliff. So my guess is we'll see that going back up again. So not so bad. I was talking with Kate Markham earlier, and she said, Jeff, I hope you have some good news today because we've been hearing so much bad news. My job has actually been a little hard and not as much fun because I have to deliver not so good news over the last 3, 4, 5 years. Today there is at least some good news, so I'm happy to say that. So the consumer sector, yeah, a little bit slowing, but I think with the resolution of some of the uncertainty, do a little bit better. I showed you the short-run expectations really on capital equipment spending, right? That looked a little bit softer. But if you look further ahead, this is a survey that the Institute of Supply Managers puts together at the end of the year. And that actually looks better. You don't need to look through all the chart, but it's tipping up at the end. And the other thing this chart shows, if you look at it harder, is that those forecasts 1 year ahead are reasonably accurate. They tend to reflect the overall trends in capital spending. So that looks a little better at the 1 year ahead horizon. So that's some other good news. The other good news, which I haven't put on the charts here, but others have mentioned, is that I think it's really clear that the housing market now is turning around. There are good reasons for that. More people are employed. Prices seem to have flattened or started to rise. And those are sort of the key ingredients. If the average household believes that prices have flattened out, given that prices are low, given that financing rates are terrific, if you are employed, it's getting to be a good time to think about buying a house. People, of course, are still more cautious than they were in 2004 or 5. You know, maybe that's a good thing, that they're a little more cautious than that. But they're starting to see the value in purchasing homes again, and that will help the economy almost certainly this year and the next. On the downside, Europe's slowdown, which Tim talked about in the global summary. Not only is it a slowdown, but these are the forecasts through the year for both 2012 and now the current year, 2013. Economists, of course, are best at forecasting the past. We're really good at that. The future is a little bit harder because it hasn't happened yet, by and large. So, but if you look at the trend there, all of the forecasts have just been getting worse and worse for 2013. The latest one we have is from the OECD for November, looking at 2013. That green bar is still negative, and it's worse than it was earlier in the year. So that's bad, and maybe the forecast is getting a little worse. I don't expect the forecast to get any worse, but the forecast is not great for Europe for the near term. They will improve over time, but not helping us maybe for this year. Geez, we're the Fed. We have to worry about inflation. So what am I showing you? The red line there is our official announced inflation goal of 2%, which we announced just about 1 year ago today. Oh, by the way, 2013. Do you know this is the 100th birthday of the Federal Reserve System? Hey, thank you. It's true, the founding legislation in 1913 and then some other legislation in 1914 that created the reserve banks like the one that I work for. Anyway, so 1 year ago, we announced this inflation goal. That's the red line. What's happened to Average inflation over the year, over the last several years, it's stayed either at or below 2%. I think that's pretty good. The more near-term trends, which are this dashed line, that's the 6-month change rather than over the past 12 months. Those are actually even a little bit lower. They're closer to 1% instead of the roughly 1.5% for the 12-month change. And then if you include the more volatile components, food and energy, which are important commodities that every household consumes for sure, but even including those volatile components on a 6-month basis or a 12-month basis, those numbers are down below our 2% goal. So that's good. That's definitely contained. It means we don't have to worry about that probably for the moment. Well, maybe in the questions we'll talk more about longer run concerns for inflation. So here's an outlook that only goes out into 2013. We have the haves of the year and the have-nots. Into 2013, what it looks like is, I think because there's still some uncertainty about the things that Congress needs to do over the next few months, I'll talk about those in a second, a little bit below 2.5% growth. But if those things are somewhat sensibly resolved, both businesses and households will probably spend with a bit more vigor in the second half of the year. I'm hopeful that something above 3%, and I think that would be very helpful because it would also mean more improvement on employment. So that's what I said. I'm going to flip through this. You don't need to read that. There's a lot of words. Okay. So, quick update on the fiscal cliff. So this is the official scoreboard for the fiscal cliff. The things in yellow are things that many people expected to happen. The red things are things that were somewhat of a surprise, and the orange things are sort of in between, using the spectral sense of the colors there. So, all right, the so-called Bush tax cuts, I've given you a sense of the budget magnitude in the second column. Both the income tax, the AMT, which needed to be fixed and adjusted for inflation appropriately and so on, capital gains and estate tax, more or less, those things were taken care of, more or less. There are details there. So you can go through the chart, and you can see that a number of things were fixed about as expected. Some things, of course, have yet to be done, and they're very important. The key things there that are not at all addressed are the debt ceiling. They're kicking the can down the road for sequestration until March or something. There are all sorts of things that need to happen on the major things that need to happen on the spending side. That is yet to come. Quick note on the debt ceiling. The chairman said in a public forum on Monday, and I would agree with this is not a partisan statement, but as a matter of logic, the debt ceiling is not the right way to think about discussing our budget problems. We do have budget problems. We do need to balance spending and taxes, especially in the long run. The debt ceiling is a crazy mechanism that is put in place for reasons that aren't clear. The point is that the debt ceiling limits expenditures that were already voted on by Congress and appropriated and are in the pipeline. It's not about things that are a surprise. It's not about things that happened unexpectedly that Congress went crazy between the time they set the budget and now. That was fully anticipatable, could be fully expected in advance, but it's then acting as a constraint. It, of course, has serious financial repercussions if we do refuse to breach the debt ceiling, and the financial markets will probably penalize us for that. So this is not to say that we shouldn't discuss the spending and the taxes. Absolutely we should, and the chairman of the Fed would agree. But the debt ceiling is kind of a clunky way of making that happen. Quickly on the region. What's going on with employment? I show you the United States, New England, the region, the state, and the city of Worcester. What's happening with employment? It's, by and large, growing, turning a corner, but somewhat slowly. So all those growth rate lines are above the zero line. So that's where we want to be. I'm going to talk quickly then about housing, what's happening there. Again, for Massachusetts, for New England, and for the U.S., default rates, even on the remaining subprime mortgages, but it's also true for prime mortgages, those are all declining. That is helping as well. Some of the defaults were delayed, of course, by legal action. Some of that is falling by the wayside, even as we speak. But I think the default picture looks better going forward. So does the employment picture. So does the housing price picture, which is the next chart. And that all means a housing recovery is in train. These house prices, again, are for a variety of regions and so on. But they're all flat to turning up, depending on the measure. On average in the U.S., house prices have started to rise. It's good news. The last part of my talk, I just want to spend a couple of minutes explaining to folks somewhat what the heck it is the Fed is doing. Because I don't think that's really transparent. We were talking at breakfast about, I don't know how many of you saw the little fuzzy bear video about the quantitative easing that came out about a year and a half ago. Well, 26 million people saw it, so some of you were here probably, but a bunch of people saw that. It was roughly 1,000 times more than the people listened to the chairman's press conferences or anything the Fed said. So that little video was doing our PR for us. It wasn't entirely complimentary about what we were doing. So part of what I want to do is explain what's going on here. So the two yellow boxes here, those are our congressionally mandated goals. We need to keep inflation low and stable. We want to make sure that employment over time gets to its maximum sustainable level. Help to make sure that happens. That's called the dual mandate. How do we usually do that? We move around the federal funds rate, that's a short-term interest rate, which in turn has an influence on long-term interest rates, on stock prices, on exchange rates, and so on, house prices. And those two things typically influence, they don't determine, but they influence both inflation and employment. So that's what those boxes and the arrows all mean together. But what's happened recently is that we can't use the federal funds rate, this short-term rate, our normal way of doing business, because it's at zero. It's as low as it can get. We can't push it lower and make the economy grow faster or make employment run faster. So what have we been doing? We've been using other policy instruments to try to do the same thing. The way I've drawn this chart is approximately right. We use those alternative instruments essentially to influence the same set of asset prices, long-term interest rates, stock prices, as we do with conventional policy. In some ways, it's actually a little bit more direct. But that's what we're trying to do, influence those same set of transmission channels to get to our dual mandate goals, just using some different tools. So now this is a chart I think you can take to your next cocktail party. This actually explains to you in simple terms, how does quantitative easing work? So it all goes down to bags of money. It always does, right? So here on the right-hand side, there are securities that are owned by the private markets, those big bags of money. Okay, so what happens? So we buy long-term assets, right? See that? Now their assets become our assets. So we've removed them from private circulation, from private markets. But look at the things shaking around there. The private agents still want those assets, right? They do. And because they still want them, they're going to bid up their prices, or equivalently, they're going to lower their yields. The net effect of that is, because we took some of them out of the private circulation and they still want them, yields, interest rates are going to go down, and that's exactly what we're trying to do. So it's, goes right with the chart before. We want to achieve maximum sustainable employment. We want to keep inflation steady. We can't do that by lowering the short-term interest rate, so we do it by these alternative procedures that still lower long-term interest rates, and we hope, on the margin, spur some additional activity. I think I'm going to skip over this. Maybe there'll be a question about this. There's definitely a lot of ink spilt about whether this quantitative easing will cause inflation, and it's based on Economic Theory 101, which is in the top part of that chart. Economic Theory 101 says the Fed just created a boatload of money. A boatload is a technical term for a whole bunch. And that must mean, because it creates money, it's going to cause inflation. It turns out you need to take Econ 201 to fully understand what's going on. And the bottom line there is just that, yes, we have created loads of what are called reserves sitting at the banking system, but they're not actually circulating around as money. So at the moment, they're not going to cause inflation. In fact, we'd like to see them circulating around a lot more. That would be a sign that the economy was healthier. That largely happens when banks lend out some more money. That creates some more real transactions money. That would certainly be a sign of an improving economy. If we left it all in there and we didn't pay attention and took a 3 or 4 year vacation, it could cause inflation, but my guess is we'll still be watching things when that happens. Just as verification of that, the most recent forecast from the members of FOMC is what's in this chart here, and it shows that looking out through 2015, they don't see any problem with inflation coming. Of course, they may be wrong, but that forecast right now says, yes, they certainly know what's happened with the quantitative easing. They don't expect it to be a problem. I'm not going to go through this stuff too much because I think it'd be better to save time for questions. But just to say, recently we've done a couple more new things. One is we're purchasing assets at a pretty high rate. The top panel is just here about we were doing something called, you might have read in the papers, called Operation Twist. And the idea of that was we exchanged some of our short-term securities to buy longer-term securities, just like the picture with the money bags before, but we were exchanging one thing for another. Recently, we changed that to say we're not going to exchange short for long-term. We're just going to buy some more long-term securities outright to the tune of $85 billion a month total. Some of those are mortgage-backed securities. Some of them are treasury securities. Again, the goal is to lower rates and spur the economy. This next thing is just about how we communicate. I'm not going to dwell too much on the communications part. Yeah. Yeah, this is fun actually because it shows you how our new communication allows the markets to kind of automatically adjust when they see us ultimately tightening policy rather than our making guesses about, well, we think it'll be the end of 2014 or the middle of 2015, and they think, well, maybe you're right, maybe you're not. It's just, it's a more conditional and actually, I think, sensible way of describing how our policy is going to go. What it basically says is, we are very unlikely to raise short-term interest rates unless the unemployment rate gets below 6.5%, as long as the inflation rate stays under control, not within about a half percentage point of that 2% goal. That's kind of what that's about. Once people know that, they can say, well, here's my guess of when the economy is going to hit 6.5% unemployment or whether inflation will get out of control. So that's what that chart shows, and you can look at it later. It's kind of fun. So to summarize, and then we can get into the Q&A session, there's no question that for us and for all of you, the economic recovery that, I don't know if you know, this began actually in June of 2009. I don't know if it feels that way to you. It doesn't feel quite that way to me, but the folks who determine these things say it happened then. It has been frustratingly slow, no question. Our tools, that is the Federal Reserve's tools to address that, are somewhat limited, but we're doing what we can. And recently, the thrust of some of our recent communications and our actions is to pay particular attention to the very challenged state of labor markets, the employment shortfalls. And it's not because we've stopped worrying about inflation, it's because we don't think that's going to be an issue for the near term. We really want to focus on unemployment and try to make that better. So thank you for your attention. I really look forward to your questions because there's plenty to talk about.
Thank you so much, Jeff. So just a reminder to everyone, it's about 9:30 now. We promised to wrap up before 10, and we will, so we'll take about 20, maybe 25 minutes of the questions, and I have them right here. I'm going to save this one, which is, what is the matchup and the score in the Super Bowl, for last. That might be appropriate right near the end. And start off with one that Jeff could take a shot at, and Tim as well. And that is this. Consumers have deleveraged by about $3 trillion in the past 5 years. Do you agree that getting that to stop is the key to starting a recovery? And if so, what's the best way to get deleveraging to stop? And of course, the other side of that coin is maybe that's more savings, it's a reduction in people's debt, and so isn't that also partly good? So can you sort of tease out that question and the implications of it?
Sure. So that's accurate. Consumers have been what people call deleveraging, which is reducing their debt and, as importantly, reducing their debt service burden. A good chunk of that came from folks who lost their homes and mortgages were extinguished as a consequence, but that's not all of it. Consumers, on average, have been, I think, appropriately more cautious about taking on debt, certainly in the wake of very high, elevated employment and slow employment growth, uncertainty about how the economy generally was going to move going forward, and then uncertainty about how the government was going to respond to that and put its fiscal house in order. All of that has made consumers justifiably cautious. I don't think anyone's in favor of consumers going back to the more carefree, I'll say, euphemistically carefree days of 2005 and 6 and the beginning of 2007. I don't think people are looking for that. I do hope that over time, as some of that uncertainty diminishes, with a reasonable amount of employment growth and the income growth that comes with it, that consumers will spend at a reasonable and prudent rate that's consistent with their income and the significantly diminished wealth, which they still have some of. So that's kind of, I think Tim's forecast looks, as he said, similar to the Fed's, which is similar to mine, not surprisingly. That's kind of where we're seeing things going, that they will regain some confidence. They will not spend crazily beyond their means, but given modest income growth, some wealth growth that comes both from the stock market and now a little bit from the housing wealth, we'll see some spending growth going forward at a moderate rate.
Tim, did you want
to? Yeah, I'll just say, let's see.
I think it's on.
Is it on? Okay. The consumer has stopped deleveraging in certain areas. For example, consumer credit, which the main things consumers borrow on, obviously, are houses and cars. We're in the early stages of very strong recoveries in both those things. So automobile credit is rising, and borrowing credit card debt is rising again. The growth rate over the last year has picked up. I think the latest numbers were about 7%. So the residual deleveraging problem is mainly focused in the housing area. And as Jeff said, the biggest amount of that was basically foreclosures, which extinguished debt. And that is diminishing. You saw the default rates in Jeff's charts. So the amount of deleveraging in housing is slowing very rapidly. The other thing is the biggest important thing that's happened in the last year, and Jeff's chart showed this, are that house prices have stopped falling. When you're a bank, you're much more cautious about lending if the underlying asset is falling in value, because that means the collateral that you've got may not cover the value of the loan. So the most important thing that's happened is we've seen pretty much across the country a widespread turnaround from declines in home prices to a pickup in home prices. In some places it's been pretty significant. That's very important also because when a consumer thinks about buying a house, if prices are falling, they think harder and decide not to buy as much housing if their outlook is that it could go down 10 or 20% and then I'm underwater like a lot of people still are. So the fact that house prices are rising, if you look at the mortgage rate and you look at how home prices are starting to rise, the real return to housing is getting very high. And so the deleveraging process is at the very tail end. It's largely confined to people who are trying to work out of high interest rate loans into lower interest rate loans and need to put more cash down to do that if their equity isn't as great. And but the Fed basically, by doing what it's done, has stopped this negative cycle of deleveraging from devolving into what we call the paradox of deleveraging, where people try to reduce their debt and asset values fall even more, and you get a vicious spiral downward. That's the kind of thing that happened in Japan. That's the basic dynamic that the Fed has successfully stopped with these unorthodox policies. And for that, we're very grateful, Jeff.
All right. A question for Girish. The healthcare cost information you describe is actually available today and has led to new insurance products. But why is the adoption rate so low? And then perhaps why? What do you see in terms of both technology and users' access to it that will sort of change that equation as you spoke of that over the next 5 years?
Are you referring to the adoption rate of technology, or?
I think the adoption rate about, I think the question refers to when you spoke about, having the options to know what the price was at three retail locations for medicine.
So no, prices are not visible yet. In fact, you will not be able to get price visibility for what it costs for labor and delivery at a teaching hospital in Boston versus what it would be at UMass in a way that you can easily consume without having to sign contracts for not distributing them to consumers without visibility. And I think that needs to change. So price transparency is not there in the industry yet, from everywhere from inpatient services to outpatient services to pharma. And that has to change for technology to become a platform for consumerism to get into healthcare. And once that happens, I do think the adoption of tools and technology to find available resources will go through the roof.
Got it. Thank you. Okay, the next question is, how will the potential oil boom, and I would actually add to that the boom in U.S. shale gas, benefit the American economy and maybe specifically manufacturing, and has that been sort of a silver lining in sort of helping our overall growth? And either one of you economists can start with that.
I'll go first this time and try to be shorter. It's a major thing. I talked about the rebalancing of trade deficits. One of the biggest sources of our trade deficit is energy. I think the last time I looked at numbers, our oil imports are down by about 50%. So that's one of the reasons we've gone from 6% of GDP trade deficit to 3%. It's also having a major effect. In a lot of other countries, they have shale gas, but because of the difficulties in exploiting it, because of government restrictions and popular protest and things like that, they're not able to develop it. So what we're seeing is European companies are starting to look at the U.S. as a place to manufacture if they need energy as one of their big inputs. This is a big boon for the chemical industry, for example, and it's a major source of growth. You might know that the International Energy Agency has forecast the U.S. is going to be the biggest oil producer in the next 10 years or so. There are all sorts of positive things that are spilling out of this. The biggest restraint on taking advantage of cheap energy is that natural gas, traditionally, it has about, the price should be about 1/7 the price of a barrel of oil for energy equivalence pricing. But the gap now, as you know, at $3 versus $100 is more like 33. So the amount of energy in natural gas is multiples cheaper for $1 than what it is with oil. Normally, this would cause all kinds of arbitrage. For example, if we could use natural gas in cars, the price we would be paying would be 1/3 of what we're paying now. And so we've got a lot of gasoline, oil-based transportation infrastructure starting to transition to natural gas, but that's a long-term proposition. But what it means is energy costs are going to remain low. Just like Girish talked about healthcare costs coming down because of technology, these energy costs will be coming down because of technology. But the biggest bottleneck right now is that most of the oil use is for transportation, and the transportation infrastructure can't utilize natural gas to take advantage of the much cheaper costs. The incentives created by that are causing a transformation of the transportation energy infrastructure, but that's going to take time. But this is a major positive, and it's got all sorts of good implications. I didn't talk about why I think the U.S. is in the catbird seat for globalization, but that's one of the reasons, and it's a very powerful one.
Okay, and this question is directed at Girish, but I think anyone could take a shot at it as well, because it's kind of a big question. The U.S. spends twice as much per capita on health care compared to other industrialized nations. Is this due to, or will sort of the technological revolution that you're referring to help put a dent in that, or do we have a more systemic issues with sort of how we're paying for that have to do with that great big Medicare, Medicaid, and just how much money goes into that nationally?
I mean, we do pay more for health care, but then again, we do pay higher salaries for employees as well. So it's, if you try to make that a lowest common denominator of trying to equate all currencies, which I'm not an expert at, but if you try to break it down to income levels to what you spend, U.S. healthcare system is not that broken, but there are places where it is. And some examples that I will give that should be looked at quite aggressively to find ways to make it more transparent and better, to find healthcare costs to come under control. The first one is an employer, for example, having the privilege to understand exactly what every dollar and every cent of their own healthcare cost system for their employee is going to. Not necessarily knowing what the employee's condition of care is, but definitely knowing where as a pool every bucket's going, and on the flip side of it, what could have been done to create competition where I could have negotiated directly with the healthcare delivery system for a better price point. If you do that, you will find that there are lots of players that will step up and find you to try and do a direct contract with you as an employer to bring that cost structure down. The second thing that I believe is areas that we don't look at as closely, because we all look at physician reimbursement as one of the big buckets of cost structure drivers to come down, because we believe that physicians can keep seeing patients as often as they want and they get paid as often as they want. But there's another set to look at, is pharma. It blows my mind that you could get an antibiotic drug on my trip to India this 2 weeks ago for 18 cents, what costs $20 at a pharmacy here. And there's no difference between the drug, and there's no difference between who makes it. Yet we have laws that say we cannot import or we cannot create price transparency. But you and I can import all the cell phones and all the televisions from anywhere in the country or anywhere in the world. So yeah, there are places of healthcare transparency that need to change. Pharma is a big place. Price visibility around ancillary services, and overall transparency in what you're spending and where to allow consumerism to get into healthcare.
Maybe just say a brief word about it. Girish knows far more about the inner workings of the healthcare system than I do. I would say that it's unlikely that we will provide high-quality healthcare to most of the citizens in the United States for an aggregate level that's much cheaper than what we have now. That is, so it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 17 or 18% of GDP. That's a lot, but it is expensive to provide high-quality healthcare. The changes that will happen are the ones that Girish is working on. That is, information will be more readily available. That'll affect the way you see prices. It will also affect the way you're able to assess the relative quality of different providers. That's a thing we take for granted when we buy other sorts of goods, that we have some way of judging quality. Much harder to do in the healthcare side. But I think the things that will happen going forward is because of technological and other improvements, the rate of increase of healthcare spending may slow relative to GDP. And the aggregate level of expenses may be very similar to where it is today, but we'll get high-quality healthcare that will improve in quality overall for roughly the same dollars spent in the aggregate.
Okay.
He said true. I would trust him.
I didn't mean the federal government with the feds. I meant the Congress and the Senate.
So there was a question posed, and you won't have had time to have studied this, but it seems, and I'm editorializing as I read this question, seems that the governor of Massachusetts thinks that the recent increase in taxes in D.C. approved at the end of the year maybe have opened the floodgates and has proposed $1 billion in new spending to support transportation infrastructure, which involve a significant increase in the Mass state income tax as well as an increase in the gas tax. So without being political, what are the economic impacts of sort of significant government spending at that level, at least on the state level?
So, yeah, I'm not going to touch the political side of that at all, but I would say that it's pretty clear to everyone that the infrastructure, the transportation infrastructure in the state needs some attention. I think that's fair. The political question is how to fund that. Now, as an economist, I like to say that it's better to tax things that are less distortionary than things that are more distortionary. And as far as these things go, maybe there's an energy tax that could help accomplish that. Maybe that's less distortionary. But that ends up being a political decision. But as an economic statement about infrastructure, in many ways, not just in transportation, the infrastructure in this state and many others is in not a great state. And that is an important complement to private activity. So it's not that government spending is a good thing, but the government spending that really measurably contributes to private activity, that's a good thing to spend on. And when it starts to fall apart, it affects private activity in a way that we won't be happy with. The political question is how to fund that, and so I don't want to get too much into that.
Okay. Next question. If European austerity was too aggressive, what, in your opinion, is the appropriate level of spending cuts in the U.S. budget? This leads directly to one of the questions on the economic forecast form on the table. So could you just give us the answer, or maybe a few words around your thoughts on
That's directed about the U.S.?
Yes.
Yeah, as I said, there's an academic literature that looks at historical examples of countries that have dealt successfully with deficit problems. And what it shows is that generally you need about $3 of revenue control for every dollar you raise taxes. So that being the case, you know, we need to get the long-term trajectory. And, you know, to be clear, we're not really talking about cutting spending. We're talking about controlling the growth of spending. And in order to do that, we need to rein it in so that it stays closer to the traditional proportion of GDP that government spending's been. And that means we need several $1 trillion of cuts in the promises of future entitlements. One thing we haven't talked about with health care that's important, I think, is that we've promised people unlimited health care. We don't know what future techniques, what future drugs, what future ways to provide health care are going to be out there, but we've essentially committed to the idea that everybody's entitled to whatever that is. So there's really no way to know what that's going to cost in the future. It is important to control whatever those costs are, and that's, you know, part of Girish's, the beauty of what he does is that that helps with that process. But we need to get real about what we can afford to do. And one of the real risks in healthcare, and again, I'm talking about healthcare instead of the budget, because it's pretty much agreed across the board that it's the healthcare cost that government incurs that are the main source of the future budget problem. As far as austerity in Europe, the U.S. isn't in any kind of a budget crisis now. The budget crisis we face is down the road when these healthcare costs get so big that they start to imply deficits that are unsustainable going forward the way Greece's were. So we have a chance, we have time, but we've got to get the trajectory for this future growth and healthcare cost under control, and we haven't faced the reality of the fact that we can't afford to give unlimited health care, top quality to everybody. And what we're seeing from some of these government policies is there's going to be an increasing divergence between what the wealthy get in the way of health care and what's able to be provided by the government under the kind of rules that are going to have to be created in order to ration health care going forward. There are already lots of good examples of that in other countries with nationalized health care. But these are some of the issues that are preventing the deficit from being dealt with because it's hard to limit this promise of unlimited health care. If we promised everybody in America the biggest house, the biggest car, the best vacation, a millionaire lifestyle, nobody thinks that's a credible promise or something that we have an obligation to do. But somehow, as a society, we've decided that we're going to give people all the health care they need, but we haven't decided how we're going to pay for it, and that's a very ugly debate, and it's going to be the major policy debate in the United States for the foreseeable future.
I'd like to say something to this. Staying healthy, I don't think is a question that any one of us will debate. That's the goal, but that doesn't equate to necessarily having to use a lot of healthcare services. So the unlimited healthcare, I mean, if you're sick, you should get healthcare, period. If you need to stay healthy or control any of your chronic conditions, there should be healthcare available unmitigated, because that was the commitment in a way that you made when you made your contributions to Social Security or Medicare, without making it political. So I don't think that you have to cut healthcare services to bring healthcare cost under control. I'll give you an example to try and highlight this. Every time I go to the physician's office, it costs me more money, and I think it probably costs the healthcare system a little bit money. But if the physician and I could actually talk via telemedicine, he or she could be more efficient. I would be more efficient. We could probably get the same quality of service at a better price point. If you and I were to try and communicate with the patient with congestive heart failure who does not want to go to the emergency room, he prefers not to go to the ER or ED himself, nobody wants to, but could be pinged by a provider, whether it's a nurse or whether it's some other healthcare provider, through technology, and said, what did you weigh today? And you just got that simple reminder every day. What did you weigh today? The patient or the individual would weigh themselves a little bit more regularly because they got that reminder. And that reminder can come in so many different ways. CVS calls my home every weekend for my dad's refill. It's just crazy. So you can call. There's a voice message system. There's a text message system. There are apps now that you can ping patients to get your weight. What does it do, though? If you find a patient with congestive heart failure where the weight profile has changed over the last 5 days, and suddenly the patient, instead of weighing 210 pounds consistently, has started to go up to 212, 213, 215, he's retaining fluids. There's a very good chance that within 2 weeks he'll end up going into the ED or the ER and then cost the healthcare system probably $5,000. So technology could have easily understood the intervention and found a way to not have the cost burden borne by any of the institutions that bear it. So my belief is that technology will not take away healthcare from a patient that needs it, but will try and bring in advancements that keep us more healthy over the next generation than we are today, and yet the growth of healthcare cost will come down, and yet you will never be prohibited from ever seeing a physician if you wanted to see them, or going and talking or getting the pill that you wanted to. So that's the other side to look at it. Technology doesn't necessarily mean you cut services. I mean, cost control doesn't mean you cut services. Cost control also means that you sometimes take what you have today and make it a lot more efficient.
Did you weigh yourself this morning? I did. Okay.
If you're a congestive heart failure patient, you should, every day.
Okay. So, Tim, you'd mentioned we've sort of just landed on the Medicare, Medicaid sort of as major cost structures, and I think the third big element in that sort of area of concern as people look at where they're going to be cutbacks is the future of Social Security. Do you see how stable are the finances around that, and what are the sort of changes necessary in that particular fund?
So I'll quickly say something. Tim, I think, got it right. Medicare, medical care provision is the real problem, not that we're going to cut everybody's benefits away, but we need to recognize the demographic bulge that is coming and is in part here. That is actually not the source of the deficit today. That is the source of the deficit, as Tim said, some years down the line, but we need to prepare for it today. Sorry, what was the question?
The question.
No, sorry.
Social Security.
Yeah, no, I know. So Social Security, I think most people don't understand this, but actually a fairly small set of adjustments to Social Security would put it on a pretty good footing for another 50 years. They are adjustments that politically may be difficult to get through, but in terms of the economic impact would be relatively small. And the reason we haven't done them is because we're in this sort of gridlock mode right now. They can be done. There are a number of people who have made the very simple, specific recommendations. Does not change your paycheck too dramatically, but it would put the system on a good footing. So that's actually not a hard problem to solve. Medical care, that's a much more complicated thing. Social Security, much simpler and much less disruptive if we have the political will to do it.
Terrific. So listen, I'm going to save you from the Super Bowl question because it's 9:58.
The answer is?
If you're so inclined, you can say it into your microphone now. But otherwise, we'll put a wrap on this since we did promise to get you out of here by 10 o'clock. Let's give a great big hand to our fantastic panel. A terrific job. I want to thank our panel here for a great job, our presenting sponsors who helped make this happen, Bank of America, Charter Business, Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare, and Nichols College, as well as our partner in this event, the Worcester Regional Chamber of Commerce. Thank you, Dick, and your team for helping make this event happen. And, of course, our supporting sponsors, Bolus Lynch and Partridge Snow and Hahn. So that's it for this morning. I think our speakers will be around for a couple of minutes. And there were a few questions I didn't get to that were handed in. So if you want to come up and ask those, hopefully our speakers have a minute before they have to race away. But thank you again for coming out this morning. Also a special thanks to the Beechwood, Curry Printing, Elevation Exhibits, Mark Serra Productions, Ron Belay Photography, and Revelation Productions, who all contributed to make this a terrific event. Thank you again for coming, and have a great morning.